Your motorcycle has been seized and will be auctioned this Saturday. That was the text. 9 words that hit harder than any punch I'd ever taken. I was halfway through my morning coffee when I read it and dropped the mug, shattering it on the kitchen floor. I stared at the message, disbelief hardening into cold fury. Gone. My $42,000 custom Harley Roadmaster. Gone. Still barefoot. Still in my bathrobe. I bolted outside. The sun had barely risen over Silverbrook Ridge, and my neighbors watched through parted curtains as I froze on my driveway. The empty slab of concrete where my bike had been was more than a space. It was an accusation. That bike wasn't just chrome and horsepower. It was a prototype, one I'd personally designed, a machine that carried years of R&D under its custom bodywork, technology no competitor had ever seen, and certainly no one had any right to touch. Then I heard it, a voice so smug it made my blood boil. Looking for something? Trent Massey, the local tow king and HOA parasite, leaned against his mailbox across the street. A ring of keys spun around his finger like a taunt. Behind him sat a brand-new tow truck. Massey Recovery Services, freshly painted on the side in gaudy chrome. "Where's my bike?" I asked, my fists already clenched. He didn't blink, just nodded toward my garage. Violation notice. Motorcycles are prohibited under HOA regulations. I followed his gaze, and there it was, an orange slip fluttering in the wind, taped to the siding like graffiti, neatly printed, digitally signed. Pamela Whitmore, HOA president. Of course. Pamela had already fined me for grass growing half an inch too tall. The same woman who once cited a neighbor for a wind chime audible past dusk. In the 6 months since I'd moved here, she'd made it her mission to police every inch of my property. Now she'd crossed a line she didn't understand. Trent smirked. It would be first up at Saturday's auction, unless you got $5,000 in cash or recovery fee. And just like that, it clicked. This wasn't about curb appeal or community aesthetics. This was a scam, a racket. Pamela creates the violations. Trent hauls the vehicles. They split the profits. But what neither of them knew, what no one in Silverbrook Ridge knew, was who they had just stolen from. They hadn't just towed a Harley. They lit the fuse on something far bigger than a neighborhood squabble. Because I wasn't just another homeowner with a loud bike and a short fuse. I was Ethan Cade, and Pamela Whitmore had just picked a fight with the wrong man. I didn't sleep that night. Not a minute. The moment I stepped back inside, I pulled down the blackout blinds, powered up my workstation, and dragged out 3 banker boxes full of documents I never thought I'd need to touch. Blueprints, HOA bylaws, towing ordinances, neighborhood maps. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was hunting. It took all of 20 minutes to confirm what I already suspected. There was no rule in Silverbrook Ridge's official bylaws that prohibited motorcycles. None. The document Pamela had referenced didn't even exist in the publicly filed version. What she'd taped to my garage was a forgery, cobbled together and backdated to look legitimate. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. By midnight, I was 3 hours into what would become a 6-hour deep dive. I scoured public records, archived minutes from board meetings, old HOA newsletters, even satellite photos. And the patterns started to emerge. Every single towing operation in Silverbrook Ridge, every car, every motorcycle, every abandoned trailer, had been handled exclusively by Massey Recovery Services, Trent's company. No competitive bidding, no oversight, just rubber stamp approvals. And then the numbers, dozens of violations issued in the past year, towing fees that doubled standard rates, impound charges that grew by the hour, appeals denied without hearing, vehicles seized without prior notice. This was enforcement. This was theft by design. I pulled out red thread and index cards. Yes, I have a wall for situations like this, and started connecting the dots. Pamela becomes HOA president. 3 weeks later, HOA funds are moved to a small regional bank. Trent Massey joins the bank's board of directors. Then comes a flurry of new rules, including an emergency revision to vehicle storage policy. And finally, the gold mine. $47,000 in towing and impound fees collected in the last 4 months alone. This wasn't just an overzealous HOA board. This was a coordinated shakedown. And I wasn't the only victim. The next morning, I invited Mrs. Chen over for tea. She'd lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone and walked with a quiet sort of pain, like someone who'd been carrying a weight for too long. She sat across from me, hands trembling slightly around her teacup. "They took my grandson's car," she whispered, "while we were at his graduation. A silver Camry. We came back and it was gone." Her voice cracked. "They wanted $3,000 just to get it back. She couldn't afford it. So they let it go to auction. One block over, the Garcia family had their vintage Triumph motorcycle taken during a family vacation. And Mr. Jackson, who lived across the cul-de-sac, told me he sold his 1967 Mustang, his retirement project, just to cover the impound fees." Each story felt like a punch. Each victim, a neighbor. And the thread that bound them all? Pamela, Trent, and a web of shell companies feeding off fear. I snapped photographs of auction flyers, bank statements, and copies of the altered HOA documents. I dug up towing receipts and matched them to home sales. And then I found it. 23 properties, all sold below market value after repeated violation citations and vehicle seizures. Guess who bought them? Shell companies, owned by Pamela and Trent. They were using the HOA to bleed homeowners dry, seize property, and flip the real estate for millions. This wasn't about motorcycles. It was about a neighborhood economy built on extortion. And they thought no one would look twice. Because bullies like Pamela Whitmore always bet on silence, on intimidation, on people being too tired or too scared to fight. But they had made one crucial mistake. They went after the wrong bike. They went after the wrong man. And now, every thread I pulled was going to strangle them. At exactly 3:17 p.m., my phone buzzed with a message that made my chest tighten. "Emergency HOA board meeting, vehicle policy updates. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. The timing wasn't random. It was precise, coordinated. I stepped to the window and, sure enough, saw them, Pamela Whitmore and Trent Massey, standing in her driveway like royalty conferring over a battlefield. Her pastel suit practically glowed under the sun. His tow truck, parked inches behind her Lexus, gleamed with fresh polish. They were whispering, glancing at my garage. And in Pamela's hands, a folder labeled auction inventory. I raised my camera and snapped several high-resolution shots with my telephoto lens. Not just for curiosity, for evidence, for the war I knew was coming. That night, I barely managed an hour of sleep before my security system's motion alert jolted me awake at 5:32 a.m. The grainy footage filled the screen. A massive recovery tow truck backing into Sarah Lane's driveway. My neighbor, her son's motorcycle, chained and covered, was being dragged into the darkness. By dawn, 3 more bikes were gone from the block, mine included. My inbox was flooded. Texts from neighbors. Questions. Panic. Desperation. "Can they actually do this?" asked Raj, holding a neon orange notice in his hand. "My motorcycle's been here for 6 years without a single complaint." "No," I said firmly. "They can't. Not legally. But they're counting on fear, on no one fighting back." And they almost won. Almost. Because just as I was preparing documents to stop them, another blow landed, one I hadn't seen coming. A call from my assistant Maria, her voice tight with concern. "The board wants to know why you haven't responded about the Tokyo deal," she said. "Your prototype, the Roadmaster design, the one you had at home, is that still in your possession?" My stomach dropped. The prototype plans. They were still in the bike's saddlebag. The bike they had seized. Everything. My company's future, my life's work, my legacy, was now locked behind 8-foot fences in a tow yard operated by the man stealing from my neighbors. I didn't hesitate. I drove to Massey Recovery, hoping, foolishly, for reason. But the moment I arrived, I knew I was walking into a fortress. Barbed wire, double locks, security cameras. And just beyond the gate, there it was, my Harley Roadmaster, lined up beside a dozen other impounded bikes under bright floodlights, being photographed for auction. A security guard blocked my path. "I'm here for my motorcycle," I said, trying to hold my temper. It was towed illegally. Office opens at 9, he said, not even bothering to look me in the eye. Retrieval fee starts at $1,500. Cash only. Cash only. My jaw clenched, because tomorrow it would be gone. Gone like Sarah's. Gone like Mrs. Chen's grandson's Camry. Gone like Mr. Jackson's Mustang. Gone like my future, unless I stopped them first. Back home, I dropped into my chair and pulled open every file I had. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. That's when my phone rang. It was Sarah, the quiet clerk in the county records office who lived 2 blocks over. "You were right," she said, her voice low, serious. "I ran the property records after you called. Since last year, 23 homes in Silverbrook Ridge have sold well below market value, and all of them followed towing incidents. And Ethan, every single one of those homes, ended up owned by companies linked to Pamela Whitmore and Trent Massey. That was the moment everything crystallized. This wasn't just about fake HOA rules or greedy impound fees. It was organized theft, real estate manipulation, a targeted, engineered collapse of property values to squeeze homeowners until they sold cheap. Then Pamela and Trent swooped in through shell companies, bought the homes, flipped them for profit, and moved on to the next victim. It was systematic. It was malicious. And it was working. Sarah dug deeper. Bank transfers, tax filings, public loan records. She found transfers between Pamela's HOA managed account and Massey Recovery's business checking. Tens of thousands of dollars. Labeled community maintenance. None of it documented in the HOA minutes. I leaned back, staring at my wall of evidence. Photos, receipts, copies of notices, all of it pointing to a single truth. They had built a criminal empire by turning fear into profit. At 6:58 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Pamela Whitmore standing there, wrapped in a cream-colored shawl, pearl necklace gleaming in the soft light. She held another orange notice in her hand, the way a magician reveals a card he knows you can't beat. "Just a friendly reminder about Saturday's vehicle auction," she said smoothly. "Abandoned property must be liquidated per our community guidelines." I didn't speak. I just stared at her. "My Harley wasn't abandoned," I finally said. "It was stolen." Her smile twitched, just slightly. "Unauthorized vehicles are subject to community enforcement," she replied. "Perhaps if you'd attended our monthly meetings." "You mean those meetings where you pass illegal rules without any votes?" I interrupted. "Where the board consists of you, your husband, and Trent Massey." That surprised her. Her eyes flared for just a moment, calculating, as if trying to assess how much I knew. She took a step back. "We maintain property values," she said tightly, "while people like you try to turn this community into a motorcycle rally." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, turning the screen toward her. "Then maybe you can explain these." I scrolled through screenshots of bank transfers, altered bylaw documents, property records, auction flyers, all tagged with her name or Massey's. She blanched, only for a second, but long enough. "I don't know what you think you're doing," she said, mask slipping into something cold and brittle. "But you're making a very serious mistake." "No, Pamela," I said quietly. "You made the mistake when you targeted the wrong motorcycle." As she turned and stormed back toward her Lexus, I was already dialing the first of 2 calls. The first went to Ree Martinez, president of the State Motorcycle Rights Association, a man I'd once stood beside during a legislative fight in Sacramento. "Ree," I said, "remember when we fought that zoning ordinance that tried to block out riders from public spaces? I need a favor." The second call went to my company's legal team. "I need everything you've got on property seizure law and HOA regulation enforcement by morning," because Pamela and Trent had built their empire on silence, fear, and legal gray areas. But I was done being silent, and I knew exactly how to turn their house of lies into a pile of rubble. At 9 a.m. sharp, I walked into the HOA office like a man walking into a courtroom he built himself. Pamela Whitmore was already seated, perched behind the polished mahogany desk like a queen on her throne. Her posture was flawless. Her smile was brittle. Trent Massey leaned against the wall behind her, twirling a keychain with the smug satisfaction of someone who thought the verdict was already in his favor. "Mr. Cade," she said sweetly, "right on time." She slid a manila folder across the desk toward me. It was already open to a single highlighted section. Article 7, Section 12, she recited like it was gospel. No recreational vehicles may be stored in driveways. This was filed with our revised HOA bylaws last month. I picked up the paper, reading the forged words under her expensive perfume. "This is your justification?" I asked calmly. "All residents were notified," she continued, her voice like honey laced with venom. "Some of us can't afford neighborhoods overrun with motorcycles. We have to maintain standards." Through the office glass, I saw Trent make a quick move, slipping something into the desk drawer behind Pamela's chair. I caught a glint of green. "Cash." My pulse jumped. "The auction proceeds will be collected tomorrow as scheduled," she continued, stacking her papers like a poker player about to declare victory. "However, given your enthusiasm for that motorcycle, we could arrange a private sale." She met my eyes, calm and cold. "50,000. Cash. And the bike's yours." My heart pounded, not from panic, from fury. "That's more than the bike is worth," I said flatly. Pamela's smile sharpened. "Value is subjective, isn't it? Especially when items hold sentimental importance." My breath caught. They knew about the prototype plans hidden in the custom saddlebag. The proprietary schematics that weren't just valuable, they were company saving. And now they weren't just trying to extort money. They were trying to sell off intellectual property worth millions. Corporate espionage, dressed up as community enforcement. I left the office shaking. Rage and fear battled behind my ribs, neither winning, both roaring. I called our legal team again, demanding they recheck every line of Silverbrook Ridge's charter. Their answer? Heartbreaking. The changes Pamela had made were fraudulent, yes, but the loopholes were enough to make enforcement technically legal. Challenging it would take months. Hearings, arbitration, red tape that would drag out long after the auction hammer fell. I didn't have months. That night, I came home to find my garage door vandalized, and bikes allowed, spray-painted in jagged red letters. My neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, silent, afraid, defeated. Years of intimidation had left them conditioned not to resist. And then my phone buzzed, another blow, a voicemail from Maria. "The board's furious," she said. "They're meeting without you. They want to know where you are, where the prototype is. They're questioning your leadership, your role as CEO." I felt the world tilt under my feet. Everything, my company, my reputation, my future, was teetering on the edge of collapse because I had parked a motorcycle in my driveway. I stared at the evidence wall I'd built in my living room. Threads connecting faces, documents, accounts, all leading back to Pamela Whitmore and Trent Massey, all pointing to a pattern of fraud, intimidation, and theft. And yet, I couldn't stop them in time. Not alone. Then a text from Sarah at the county clerk's office. "They're prepping your bike for auction. Special preview for buyers tonight. You'll want to see this." I drove past Massey Recovery, watching from the shadows as high-rolling collectors strolled through floodlit rows of gleaming bikes. One man ran his hand along my Harley's custom leather seat, right over the hidden compartment that held my company's future. Trent stood on the platform, microphone in hand. "Bidding starts at 30 grand, he said. This one belonged to some hotshot who didn't understand our community values. I slumped in my car, devastated. My dream, my work, my bike was about to be sold to the highest bidder by two small-time crooks dressed in neighborhood politics. Then my phone lit up again. A message from Ree Martinez. "Cavalry's coming. Hold tight." And for the first time in days, I smiled, because Pamela and Trent had built a kingdom on fear. But they had forgotten what happens when the wrong person decides to fight back. The morning of the auction dawned with skies so blue they looked painted. A perfect day for Pamela Whitmore's carefully choreographed theft. She probably imagined it like a movie, her in pastel linen, clipboard in hand, sipping her imported espresso, while collectors snapped up abandoned property like it was high-end estate jewelry. But I had my own script. At 7:30 a.m., I was already outside, methodically setting up camera rigs on my lawn, my porch, my rooftop, every lens focused on the auction lot, where my Roadmaster gleamed like a trophy waiting to be stolen. Every click of a shutter felt like chambering around. At 8:02 a.m., Pamela emerged from her front door like she was walking a red carpet. Perfect posture, coral blazer, a sharp little smile she reserved for PR photos and public shaming. She barked orders to volunteers as they set up folding chairs. Trent checked the microphone while buyers and expensive loafers wandered among the bikes, sipping coffee, examining engines like vultures circling roadkill. At 8:10, Pamela spotted me watching from my driveway. She raised her hand and drew her fingers slowly across her throat, a silent threat. I didn't move because I was listening, waiting, and then it came, the rumble. At first, it was faint, like distant thunder. Then it grew louder, deeper, heavier, unmistakable. The roar of engines. Within minutes, they came. Harleys, Indians, Triumphs, Ducatis, more motorcycles than I could count pouring into Silverbrook Ridge like a steel tidal wave. They came from every street, flanking both sides of the cul-de-sac, engines purring and howling, chrome flashing in the morning sun. Pamela froze mid-sentence, her cup suspended halfway to her mouth. Her smile vanished. Trent dropped the mic. The entire neighborhood came alive. Curtains flung open, porches filled, phones raised. What had been a place of whispered fear now vibrated with raw electricity. Children stared wide-eyed. Neighbors clapped, shouted, laughed in disbelief. A black and silver Harley rolled up beside me. Ree Martinez, beard streaked with gray, patches stitched across his vest like a living history book, dismounted and clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Good morning, Chief," he said with a grin. "Your cavalry has arrived." I nodded, eyes stinging for the first time. "You came," I whispered. "When the CEO of the most iconic motorcycle company in the world calls for backup," he said, "you don't ask questions. You fire it up and ride." Behind him, over 2,000 bikers filled the street, veterans, nurses, engineers, retirees, teachers. Clubs with names like Classic Iron, Ladies of Chrome, and Chrome Hearts for Kids. People Pamela would have called outsiders, troublemakers, eyesores. Today, they were witnesses. Pamela spun, fury on her face, storming toward us. "This is private property," she shrieked. "You can't bring these people here." Actually, Pamela, came a new voice from behind her. Mrs. Chun, the woman whose grandson had lost his car, who had sat in my kitchen, shaking from the memory. She held up a packet of documents, voice calm but clear. "We checked the bylaws. There's nothing that prohibits organized neighborhood events, especially when they're non-commercial and community-based." Pamela's jaw worked silently, trying to form a rebuttal. She couldn't, because for the first time, she wasn't in control. The Rodriguez family rolled out coolers and a lemonade stand for the riders. The Patel kids ran between bikes with disposable cameras. Even grumpy Mr. Johnson stood near his vintage Indian chief, holding court like a hometown hero. "This is illegal," Pamela screamed. "Funny," I said, pointing down the street. "That's what I told you last week." She turned to run, to call someone, anyone. Too late. Officer Rivera, a longtime motorcycle enthusiast himself, was already there, leaning against his cruiser, chatting with Ree and munching on a cookie from Mrs. Chen's Tupperware. When Pamela ran to him, ranting about trespassing and disorderly conduct, he just lifted his coffee and smiled. "Already handled," he said. And then the final blow. A black SUV pulled up. 2 people stepped out in dark suits, badges visible. "Pamela Whitmore?" the man asked. "We're with the district attorney's office. We have some questions regarding misappropriation of HOA funds, unlawful vehicle seizure, and conspiracy to defraud homeowners." Pamela sputtered, backpedaled, reached for Trent. But Trent had gone ghost pale, and he wasn't reaching for her. He was reaching for the tow truck keys, trying to flee. But every escape route was blocked by steel and thunder. The crowd parted silently as I strode toward the auction platform, every step echoing with quiet resolve. Trent stood frozen, keys dangling uselessly in his trembling fingers. Pamela watched me approach, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Taking the microphone, I paused for a heartbeat, feeling the weight of every gaze locked upon me. For those who don't know me, I began, voice steady and amplified clearly across the suddenly hushed gathering. My name is Ethan Cade. 6 months ago, I came here seeking peace and community, a place to call home. But instead, I found something different. Pamela scoffed, finding her voice. Your motorcycle disrupted. I raised my hand gently, silencing her instantly. My motorcycle, I continued deliberately, a custom-built Harley-Davidson Roadmaster prototype, was seized illegally, and this wasn't an isolated case. Behind me, projected images flashed onto a portable screen. Bank transfers, forged HOA documents, towing receipts and property records. Murmurs rippled to the crowd as neighbors recognized their own experiences woven into a broader pattern of corruption. These two, I pointed firmly at Pamela and Trent, have systematically manipulated Silverbrook Ridge, extorting residents, seizing cherished vehicles, and forcing families from their homes to line their pockets. Gasps turned to outrage as neighbors stepped forward, nodding in agreement. Speaking up, their fear dissipating into anger. Pamela lunged forward, desperate to regain control. You have no proof. Oh, but I do. I interrupted calmly, holding up a business card, my name embossed beneath a recognizable emblem, the iconic shield of Harley-Davidson Motor Company. I'm not just a homeowner you chose to bully. I'm the CEO of Harley-Davidson. The bike you seized contained proprietary designs worth millions, designs now compromised through your greed. Stunned silence fell. Trent dropped his keys with a metallic clink against the stage. Pamela's face drained of color, her carefully constructed authority crumbling under the weight of her exposed corruption. Corporate espionage carries severe consequences. I continued, stepping aside as federal agents approached, presenting warrants. It's over. As Pamela and Trent were escorted away, applause broke out spontaneously, loud, passionate, and full of relief. The engines of 2,000 motorcycles roared in triumphant harmony, drowning out Pamela's protests as the neighborhood, long silenced by fear, finally reclaimed its voice. In the center of it all, I stood quietly, allowing the sound, the beautiful, deafening roar of justice, to wash over me, knowing we'd just taken back our community. In the weeks that followed, Silverbrook Ridge underwent a profound transformation. Pamela and Trent's arrest sent shockwaves beyond our streets, becoming a cautionary tale about power, greed, and the courage it takes to resist them. But more importantly, the neighborhood found something it had lost: its heart. On a cool Saturday morning, exactly 1 month after the infamous auction day, I stood by my open garage door, watching local kids admire my Harley. The hateful graffiti, once spray-painted to intimidate, had been replaced with a vibrant mural, motorcycles painted proudly by local artists, celebrating the very thing Pamela had tried to suppress. Our emergency HOA meeting, attended by every resident, was unanimous in its decisions. Pamela Whitmore and Trent Massey were permanently removed from their positions, their crimes ensuring they'd never again hold power here or anywhere else. But instead of filling the void with more bureaucracy, we chose another path, one rooted in unity rather than division. We established motorcycle safety courses, a scholarship fund for aspiring mechanics, and monthly neighborhood bike shows, drawing visitors and breathing life back into our streets. The very machines Pamela and Trent saw as threats now symbolize freedom, friendship, and shared purpose. Families like Mrs. Chen's reclaimed their dignity and property. Her grandson's car returned home, free of charge and with a fresh coat of paint. The Garcias saw their beloved vintage Triumph lovingly restored, costs generously covered by Harley-Davidson itself. And my prototype designs? They not only became our company's best-selling model, but also funded nationwide initiatives combating HOA corruption, ensuring no community would suffer what we endured. Standing in my driveway, surrounded by neighbors who had become friends, I understood fully that true justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about rebuilding trust, hope, and compassion. Silverbrook Ridge hadn't merely recovered from corruption. It had grown stronger because of it. Sometimes, Redemption isn't found by returning to what was lost, but by building something even better from the wreckage others left behind. 6 months later, peace had settled comfortably into Silverbrook Ridge. Life had regained its gentle rhythm. Morning rides through winding roads, children playing freely, neighbors smiling genuinely, without fear lingering behind their eyes. Then one afternoon, sorting through the day's mail, an envelope caught my eye. The handwriting, crisp and precise, immediately sparked recognition, a style once associated with unwanted notices and false warnings. My heart skipped a beat as I opened the letter and read the familiar, meticulously inked complaint. Dear Mr. Cade, I have relocated to Eastwood Estates, seeking refuge from disruptive elements. Unfortunately, this neighborhood, too, is plagued by incessant motorcycle noise. Surely, as CEO, you can do something about this? Sincerely, Pamela Whitmore. I stare at the letter, incredulous at her audacity, but then laughter overtook disbelief. Pamela, ever consistent, had learned nothing, carrying her disdain from one community to the next. But the irony wasn't lost on me. Pamela, who'd once wielded power to silence engines and people alike, was now merely reduced to penning politely worded letters. Smiling, I reached for a fresh Harley-Davidson catalog, neatly circling several models before placing a bold, friendly note inside. Pamela, glad to hear from you. Bikes are still available. Employee discount applies. Might help you fit in better. Warm regards, Ethan Cade, CO. Dropping the reply into the mailbox felt uniquely satisfying. Justice served with gentle humor. Pamela had tried to dismantle my life and my community. Yet in doing so, she'd unintentionally strengthened both. Sometimes the past comes calling, not as a threat, but as a reminder of just how far we've come. Standing outside my home in Silverbrook Ridge, twilight settling gently around me, I watched the neighborhood wind down for the night. Kids raced home for dinner. Engines purred softly into garages, and porch lights flickered warmly to life, illuminating paths that once felt shadowed by fear. Pamela and Trent's scheme had crumbled, replaced by something powerful and unbreakable, genuine community. Yet the lesson I carried from this ordeal went far beyond the limits of our small streets. Corruption isn't always found in grand halls of power. Sometimes it takes root quietly, growing behind pleasant smiles and promises of safety, spreading in silence and compliance. I'd seen firsthand that danger doesn't come only from those wielding authority, but from those who misuse it, believing their position gives them immunity. But I'd also learned something profound, something stronger than fear. It only takes one voice to break silence, one person willing to stand up and say, enough, to inspire others. In the face of injustice, silence isn't just complacency, it's complicity. My neighbors, once afraid, had reclaimed their voices. Our collective courage hadn't just saved motorcycles or homes. It saved the soul of our community. It had reminded us all that the greatest power we possess isn't titles or wealth, but the strength of standing together. Mounting my Harley, feeling its familiar rumble beneath me, I glanced once more at the mural, a vibrant symbol of resistance, unity, and hope. I realized the truth clearly. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't fighting back. It's rising higher, building something beautiful and enduring from the ashes others leave behind. As I rode away into the calm evening, engine humming contentedly, I knew that Silverbrook Ridge and the lessons we'd learned here would stay with me forever.